thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Charlie Barron, and I'm a consultant working with ICASO on StepWise, the Community Guide to AIDS 2014. I'm here in Ohio, United States, where it is just after 11 a.m. This webinar is being brought to you by ICASO, ICAD, and the Global Network of People Living with HIV. Also, other civil society partners for the conference for AIDS 2014, including SIDACCION and the International Community of Women Living with HIV/AIDS, are also part of bringing this to you today. What we're going to cover is very similar. If you had an opportunity to catch the AIDS 2014 webinar on visas and immigration about a month and a half ago, covering a lot of the same topics, including applying for an Australian visa, which I'll say right now, we encourage everybody to begin that process immediately if you haven't. We'll be learning about the various options and processes for applying for that visa. Some folks will have a fairly straightforward process all online. Others will unfortunately have to go through a more involved process. So we'll be talking about where to apply for folks that need to do it online or in person or by post. Talking about the evidence needed for your application. These are the things you really need to be getting started on now, as they can take the longest amount of time to pull together. We're talking a little bit about what happens if your visa is denied, and things to be thinking about upon arrival into Australia. Some of the things you can bring that you cannot bring, and then some tips for your stay in Melbourne. We're very pleased to have with us this morning Helen von Dadelszen from the International AIDS Society. She's the Conference Partnerships Manager there and is the chief liaison with civil society, particularly as relates to the International AIDS conferences. I've been the pleasure of working with Helen for a while now, and I'm really glad she's joining us this morning. She is the resident expert on visa issues at the IAS and has been working on those issues since 2006 when she joined the International AIDS Society. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, Helen. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Helen, who will take us through the core of our presentation today. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, please hold those till the end or type them in the chat box. We'll be keeping track of those, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to respond to questions, or if you'd like to share an experience that you've had with applying for a visa. So it's all yours, Helen.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this webinar. I hope I don't speak too quickly for everyone. There's a lot of information to cover, but I believe we're recording this as well as sharing the slides for everyone's use later. And we've also got a lot of information already on the AIDS 2014 website as well as StepWise. So before I start, I just wanted to bring up a few really important points. The visa processes can be very challenging, particularly if you're applying from a developing country. So you need to consider the time and cost of application and start now. The Australian government has asked us to encourage people to apply before mid-May, so that's now, to ensure the embassies have at least 2 months to process the visa applications. But don't worry, it's not too late, but you really do need to start looking into the requirements now and apply as soon as possible to avoid disappointment. Obviously, attending this webinar is a great first step. Now, in terms of if you're HIV positive, you do not need to disclose your status. There is no question asking you about your status on the visa application form. There is a question which mentions HIV, and I'll cover that later in the presentation. Some people get confused because longer-term immigration processes for Australia do require disclosure of HIV status. But I repeat that for delegates for AIDS 2014, for the short-term visas, there is no question regarding your HIV status. and the visa can definitely not be declined based on your HIV status. There are a couple of different processes for the visa, and it really depends on which passport you hold. So I'll go into these in more detail on the next slides. And finally, don't forget to check which countries you're transiting through. So, and apply in plenty of time. So for example, if you're coming from Europe, you will probably transit somewhere in Asia. So it's important to check the requirements for that country, as you may need to send your passport off to another country's office, and this may take additional time and potentially cost as well. So the visa process that you need to follow will depend on which passport you hold. This diagram, which we also have on the fact sheet for immigration, explains which visa option you need to follow, or what if you have options. So for example, if you're from one of the countries in the first box, whether it's Singapore, Malaysia, the USA or Canada, you should apply for the ETA, the Electronic Travel Authority. If you're from one of the countries in the middle box, for example Italy, the UK, Norway or Germany, you can choose whether to apply for the ETA or the eVisitor. If your country is listed in the right-hand box, for example Hungary or Romania, you should apply for the eVisitor. Now if you find that your country is not listed here in this diagram, that means that you need to apply for the Visitor Business Stream Visa. So I'll go into each of the details for each of those visa types now. So both the eVisitor and the ETA are simple, quick and cheaper than the visitor visa. So if you hold a passport from an eligible country, you should apply for one of these. The ETA is cheap, only 20 Australian dollars, and the eVisitor is free. The application process is either online or through an agent. So the agents are travel agents, airlines, specialist service providers, or you can do it through an Australian visa office. The guidance is that you need to apply at least 2 weeks before travel. I would recommend that you apply as soon as possible so you don't forget. Health insurance is recommended and proof may be requested. But I think it's quite unlikely that that will be requested. I haven't heard of anyone being asked for that yet. The outcome of your application is usually very quickly sent to you by email if you submit online, or within 2 weeks if you're applying through an agent. You should print the confirmation email or letter and have it with you when you travel to Australia. The information is stored electronically and connected to your passport. But it's worth printing it out because you might be asked when you check in for your flight or at another point in your journey. One thing I'd like to point out here is that if you've had any criminal convictions, you should apply for the Visitor Business Stream Visa instead. Now, if you're from one of the countries that's not eligible for the ETA or the eVisitor, you will need to apply for the Visitor Business Stream Visa. Now, there are various other options for short-term travel to Australia, but the Visitor Business Stream Visa is the one that the Australian Immigration Department have recommended for our delegates. So the things you need to know: you need to apply 2 months or more before you travel. That means now. So for example, if you plan to arrive before the conference, maybe the 18th or 19th of July, it'll be the 18th or 19th of May. You should really apply as soon as possible if you have not done so yet. This is quite a more demanding process than the other ones and will take a couple of weeks at least, depending on where you need to apply. It is true that it doesn't necessarily take 2 weeks, but we're asking people to apply as soon as possible. Otherwise, you might find that you're still waiting for the answer of your visa when you should be travelling to Australia. In terms of how you apply, some people, depending on where you're living, you may be able to apply online. If not, you will need to apply through the post or send your application by courier, or some countries have service delivery partners. You really need to check the information for your country as soon as possible. And it's based on where you're living, not which passport you're holding. So for example, if you have a Ugandan passport but you live in Kenya, you need to apply in Kenya. So as I said, each office has a slightly different processing procedure, and it's really important that you check exactly what you need to do depending on where you need to apply. There are different methods of application, different costs, and there may be additional documentation that your office requires. The application fee is Australian $145. In terms of how you pay, that information is available on the Embassy's website. Unfortunately, this week we found out that Nairobi, Kenya is no longer accepting bank transfers. Now, we're really concerned about this. It may cause real difficulties for people without credit cards who have to apply in Nairobi. And we're trying to seek clarification, and we're looking to the Australian authorities to help us find solutions for delegates in this solution. As soon as we have more information, we will share it with everyone who's registered, and obviously with StepWise as well, so they can let people know. On top of the $145, there may be additional costs that you will incur. For example, getting documentation certified or paying for postage. Biometrics are also required for some passports. So there's a list online. I'm just looking at some of the countries that registered for this webinar. You'll need, if you live in the following countries, you will need to complete the process: Nigeria, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. Now, it's quite a simple process, but it involves you providing a 10-digit fingerprint scan and a facial photograph, and it needs to be done at one of their designated offices. So it is a quick process. It should only take 5 minutes, but you should take it into consideration when you're applying for your visa. You should be submitting certified copies of your original documents, including your passport, not originals. Now, that's really important. So even if you have to apply to an office that's outside of your country of residence, you need to be sending copies, not your original documents. Now, certified copies are documents which have been authorized or stamped as being true copies of originals by a person or agency recognized by the law of the country in which you live. All the departmental offices outside of Australia have a person who can certify or witness these documents, but again, you may have to pay for that service. It's also important to note that you need a passport which is valid for at least 6 months from the date of entry into Australia. So if your passport expires in January, maybe you just need to check which date in January, or if it's before then you may need to apply for a new passport before you process the visa. The visa is linked to your passport, so if you do change passports, you'd need to reapply for the visa. Now, notification of the outcome of your application is sent by post or email. Usually a physical stamp or sticker is not attached to your passport. Make sure you keep the confirmation with you in case you're asked about it during your journey to Australia. In terms of where to apply, you may have already recognised that many countries don't have an Australian embassy. In this case, you need to contact the office responsible for processing your country's visa. But as I said before, it's not necessary to travel to your nearest office. You can complete your application by post or some countries online. I really encourage everyone to check the link to see where they should be applying. For example, many people based in Africa will need to send their application to Pretoria, South Africa, or Nairobi, Kenya. There is another office in Cairo, Egypt. You need to check the requirements for posting your application or doing it online, as well as whatever payment methods there may be. You will probably find that the websites are all a bit complicated, so take the time to read through carefully and ask for clarification if anything doesn't make sense to you. The fact sheet that the Conference Secretariat has put together, which has been approved by the Australian Immigration Department, should hopefully help explain some of those processes and help you through the process. So I had a look at the people who had registered for this webinar, and I've just listed some of them up here so you know where to apply. So for example, Pretoria, as I mentioned, manages many countries in Africa, so including Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, as well as Malawi. Now the countries with a little star next to them mean that that country also needs the biometrics done. Nairobi, Kenya will manage Burkina Faso, Burundi, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, and many more. In Pakistan, you have an office in Islamabad who can manage, can process your visa. El Salvador, you get the option to either send it to Mexico City or Ottawa in Canada. There's an office in Ankara, Turkey that manages Georgia as well as some other nearby countries. A few people registered for the webinar from Papua New Guinea. There is an office in Port Moresby who would process your visa. In India, the main office is in New Delhi. However, there are many service delivery partners in some of the main cities throughout India. And for Yemen, you would need to apply in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. So again, I'd like to stress, please check where you need to apply and exactly the requirements of that country. Now, when you're applying, the visa officer is looking to see if you meet the following criteria. The first one is, do you have a legitimate reason to travel to Australia? Well, to prove that you have a legitimate reason, you need to provide evidence that you're going for the conference. So you should have the conference letter of invitation or any other invitation or letter of support that you have from your organisation or network. So for example, if you've been invited to be part of the sex worker networking zone, get the organisation putting it together to give you a letter so you can add that to your application. Also, if you're attending any of the affiliated events, it's a good idea to get proof of that registration so that the visa officer can see that you are really engaged and going to Australia for a legitimate reason. So number two, they're looking to see that you will return to your country of residence. So that means that you really need to provide proof of your ties to your country of residence. So things like a job contract, evidence of your family being in the country, your involvement with the community, any assets or housing agreements, and things like that. That will all prove that you're likely to return to your home country. The third one is the character requirements, which I'll go through to in the next slide, and the health requirements, which I'll provide details in. So I really recommend that you have more rather than less documents to really prove that you meet each of these requirements. For the character requirements, the information is relatively vague. Each application is taken on an individual basis. However, this is the information that we have. You will not pass the character test if you have a substantial criminal record. So what they consider substantial criminal record is a sentence to a term of imprisonment for 12 months or more, or being acquitted of an offence on the grounds of unsoundness of mind or insanity and detained in a facility. Also, if you have an offence relating to immigration detention, or you have any association with an individual or group involved in criminal conduct, or they suspect that you may engage in criminal conduct in Australia. If you do have a criminal conviction that you think might cause problems here, I really ask you to seek some advice before you go through this process. The Conference Secretariat aren't in the position to give legal advice, but we do have contacts with the HIV Legal Centre based in Sydney who may be able to help you. But I would really encourage you to think carefully about if your criminal conduct could result in your visa being denied or additional problems and complications. For health requirements, it's important to note that temporary visa applicants intending to stay in Australia for less than 3 months, so that's most conference delegates, are generally not required to undergo full health examinations. Again, HIV status is not asked on any of the visitor visa forms and cannot be used as grounds for the denial of the visa. However, there is a question that has tripped up a few people already.
What's happening? Oh, it's the elections. Oh, exciting.
Hello? Okay, sorry about that. So there is a question that may trip up some people, so I just wanted to bring it up here. On the visa application form, there is a question asking, during your proposed visit to Australia, do you expect to incur medical costs or require treatment or medical follow-up for? And then there's a list of different diseases and conditions. HIV infection, including AIDS, is listed there. Now, it's important to note that this question is not asking if you are HIV positive, it's asking if you're going to be a burden on the Australian healthcare system. Now, if you don't expect to incur significant medical costs while you're in Australia, you can tick no here. If you do tick yes, that will automatically trigger a health examination. Now, you must answer yes to this question if, while in Australia, you think you need to go to hospital, if you require medications that you're not bringing with you, or if you intend to undergo any medical procedures. It's worth noting that if you tick yes, you will be asked to go through a health examination at your own expense with one of their accredited physicians, and that can be very expensive. The medical examination will lengthen the process and can be quite expensive, with a few $100s at least. Now, it's worth noting here that for people on harm reduction, opioid substitution therapies, who aren't able to get takeaways in their country, we have further information that we can provide, and you do not need to tick yes for this question if you're going to get takeaways through the harm reduction doctor at the conference. Now, TB is the only health condition which would result in a visitor visa being denied. So it's important that if you have had or currently have or suspect to have had TB, you'll need to tick yes to the TB question on the application form. And that will trigger a medical examination as well. Now, if you are found to have active TB through that examination, your visa will be denied. So, I went into this a little bit earlier. It's important that you prepare your documents well ahead of time to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements. The visa officer going through your application will also ask for additional documentation or information if they're not sure. But obviously that delays the processing of your visa application, so the more you can provide right at the beginning, the better. So we recommend that you provide the conference letter of invitation. This is a document which you can get after you've registered and paid for your registration. And that will also mean that you're in the registration database that we are sharing with the Australian Immigration Department, so the visa officers can check that you're on our registration list. If you're not being registered as a delegate, you would provide the letter from the Global Village or exhibition organiser, as I mentioned before. You should also provide scholarship reward letters or other letters from employers or institutions or the organisation supporting your attendance, which details which financial support they're providing you and your role. You should also provide evidence of educational qualifications, your current employment position and your role. Or for those not employed in the HIV field, a letter from your organisation or network that you're affiliated with. It's also important to show information of the incentive and authority to return to your country of residence, which I covered before. So if you have a history of international travel, that will help, showing your assets in your home country, your residence permit in your resident country, an employment contract, children's birth certificates, university or college proof of enrolment, property contracts, utility bills, etc., just to prove that you're likely to return to your country, that there's a life waiting for you there. And that's basically because they're worried about people staying in Australia outside of the conditions of their visitor visa. Now, unfortunately, not everyone will have their visa accepted, so I just wanted to let you know what happens if your visa is denied. You will receive, whether you're successful or not, notification letter or email advising you of the success or not of your application. So if it's a denial, they need to provide you with the reasons for the refusal, the reviewing rights, and the time limit for lodging an appeal. Now, the application fee for this review is very expensive. So just to attend a conference, even if it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I don't think it would be worth anyone to go through the review process. It's really important to note that there is no appeal process. I know there are for some other country visas. If you're denied, you can ask for an appeal. There is no such process for Australia. So that's why I'm saying please be prepared and to submit the best application you can right from the beginning. If you are denied the conference, we can refund your conference registration fee minus a handling fee. But that really is if you make it in time. Now we say mid-May, but we'll be a little bit flexible on that, but definitely before the end of May you need to apply, and you need to prove that your application was made before then, before the end of May, and prove that the denial, the visa was denied. And the process is all explained on the registration section of the IAS 2014 website. So hopefully you will all get your visas in time, and all your transit visas, and make your way to Australia. So we've prepared some information on what to expect when you arrive in Australia. There's information to augment this currently put on the IAS 2014 website as well. So the first thing you need to know is when you're on the plane on the way to Australia, you'll be given an incoming passenger card. Every person needs to complete this. It asks questions about how long you're staying for, where you're staying, as well as questions on things that you're bringing into the country. When you arrive, you will be asked a series of questions by immigration officers. They'll ask about where you're staying, how long you're staying for, what you're doing here, etc. Now, it is normal to be questioned a little bit at the border. Everyone is questioned, so don't be concerned about it. Just be prepared with all your documentation so you're able to answer quickly and correctly what hotel you're staying in, or what the exact dates of the conference are, etc. The more prepared you are, the better you'll feel, and the less scary that immigration processing will be for you. It's also useful for you to have the relevant documentation in your carry-on luggage, as you won't have got your checked-in luggage by the time you get to immigration. So things like your hotel confirmation, your return flight tickets, the conference letter of invitation, and any other support letters, as well as any medication and doctor's letters supporting that medication. Now, in terms of the yellow fever vaccination certificate, if you've been in Africa, South or Central America or the Caribbean in the 6 days prior to arriving in Australia, you'll be asked to produce a yellow fever vaccination certificate. Now, I know that if you're HIV positive and coming from one of these countries, you should get a letter from your doctor explaining that you can't have the yellow fever vaccination, as we know that it interacts with certain antiretroviral drugs. Now, this letter doesn't need to state your HIV status. It just says that you're not able to get the vaccination. The Australian Department of Health is aware that the yellow fever vaccine is not recommended for people living with HIV, and has assured us that people from living with HIV from the yellow fever zone will be allowed to enter Australia without the certificate. It's worth noting that you may be taken aside and briefed on the dangers of yellow fever, and they may explain to you what to do if you think you have yellow fever while you're in Melbourne. Now, it's also worth noting that Australia has very, very strict customs rules. And as I said, there's plenty of information now available on the IAS 2014 website. So your luggage will be x-rayed, and there are often sniffer dogs around where you pick up your luggage, smelling basically for any sort of food or plant things, and also illicit drugs. It's important to not bring any food or wood or plant products, any woven goods or shells, feathers, or anything that's made from plant or vegetable matter. These could be confiscated at the airport on entry, and you may have to pay a fine as well. Some food is allowed, such as processed and vacuum-packed food, but you need to declare it, and they'll look at it, and you may face an expensive fine if they say that you're not allowed to take it in and you didn't declare it. You'll also be asked if you've been on a farm or in a wilderness area near a lake or river, or handled farm or animals over the past 30 days. Now basically they're making sure that you're not bringing any soil into the country, so make sure that you clean your shoes before you pack them. In terms of duty-free, the Australian government only allows you to bring in duty-free a maximum of 50 cigarettes. Now in Australia, cigarettes are extremely expensive, almost $1 per single cigarette, so my recommendation is to quit before you go or bring under the limit that's allowed in terms of duty-free. I really recommend that you read through the fact sheet that we've provided on the Visa and Customs Information section of the IAS 2014 website to make sure that you have full details on the customs. Now, there is information also on bringing medication into Australia. That's now posted on the website. It's worth noting that on the incoming passenger card, you'll be asked if you are bringing into Australia goods that may be prohibited or subject to restrictions, such as medicines, steroids, illegal pornography, firearms, weapons of any kind, or illicit drugs. Now, we can reassure you that you can tick no for any antiretroviral drugs and most OSTs. So you can bring in up to 3 months of prescribed medication for your own use, such as HIV medications. There's no need to declare them. But the recommendation is that you put your medication in your hand luggage, and you can carry a prescription or doctor's letter in English listing the prescribed medications. Prescribed opioid substitution drugs are also typically allowed, but it depends on the drug. And check the details on the website if you have questions about that. Now, anabolic steroids and androgenic substances cannot be brought into Australia without a permit from the Therapeutic Goods Administration or the Office of Chemical Safety. Information on how to obtain the permit is on the conference website. I must say it's a little bit of a complicated and long process, so if you need to bring those substances into Australia, please look into it as soon as possible. Now, once you get through all the customs and immigration, hopefully you can experience the lovely city that Melbourne really is. A few tips that you might need to know. Firstly, Melbourne tap water is drinking water and it's free. So you don't need to go and buy bottles of water, especially from the hotel, which can be extortionately expensive. So get a bottle, bring your own bottle, and keep it topped up from any tap, and it's totally drinkable and fine to do that. It's worth noting that unlike the Northern Hemisphere, July is winter in Melbourne, and it's quite an unpredictable climate. On average, the maximum daytime temperature in July is about 13 degrees Celsius. So it can get down to 6 degrees Celsius overnight. It's pretty cold. It may also rain and can be quite windy. So it's worth packing layers of clothes, a jacket, as well as a hat, gloves, and put in some closed shoes with warm socks. Now, unfortunately, the cost of living is pretty high. The conference centre is beautifully positioned, but it's on the banks of the Yarra River, and eating out in the area is quite expensive. There are some cheaper places to eat at the northern end of Swanston Street in the city and near the University of Melbourne. There are also many smaller supermarkets where you can buy snacks such as instant noodles, and that will keep your costs down. As I said before, information on accessing methadone or other OSTs, if you're unable to get takeaways in your country, is now available on the conference website. And if you know you'll need some help, please write to harmreduction@aids2014.org so that the doctor that we have on site is available to help you promptly there. So just in conclusion, it is quite complicated and might seem quite scary, but the best thing to do is find out exactly what you need to do and do that now and apply as soon as possible. There's lots of information available on the website. We put a fact sheet together which hopefully will help people through the process. And again, I'd like to reiterate that you should check exactly what you need to do for where you need to apply for the visa. If you have any problems, please write to me at visa@aids2014.org and I will help you as much as possible. Maybe just say I can't give you legal immigration advice, but I can give you advice from the information that I've gathered over the last few years for Australia, as well as the lessons I've learned over the last few conferences and how to prepare visa applications and what documentation, etc. is needed. So please don't hesitate. And that's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen, for an excellent presentation. Wanted to open the floor now to any questions that callers may have. None have come through in the chat box, but if you're called in on the line and you'd like to ask a question of Helen or any of us, press *7 to unmute your line so that you can ask a question. That's *7 on your phone. Or you can type it into the chat box now. All right. It sounds like we don't have any questions on the line. Just jumping back quickly, reminder that if you do have specific visa questions that aren't legal questions, go ahead and send those directly to Helen at visa@aids2014.org, or as always, feel free to post your questions or experiences on StepWise in our visa and immigration page. And you can also send an email to the StepWise team, and we can help you with your questions at any time. So we're going to wrap up in just a moment. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars that ICASO, ICAD, and GMP Plus are hosting. The next one will be focused on networking and support at the conference for people living with HIV. It will be held on the 12th of June. We are currently working out a time that works best for our presenters and our audience. It will be hosted by Julian House from GMP Plus. We'll be talking about what kind of services are available for people living with HIV on site at the conference, where you can get additional information and how to find support and network with other people living with HIV. More details will be circulated to our list and available on StepWise website and Facebook and Twitter. And just as an alert, our third and final webinar will be in July, and will be focused on the various roadmaps for navigating all the many sessions and activities at the conference. So I'll open the floor one last time, both to our hosts and presenters and to our callers if you have any questions or comments. Sounds like no. So again, my name is Charlie Barron, and on behalf of ICASO, ICAD, and GMP Plus, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on June 12th and then in Melbourne. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.